This program contains scenes that have been dramatized, with special attention given to historical accuracy. When the Soviet Union invades Afghanistan, they go deep into the shadows to fight back.
The U.S. government's initial reaction was very swift.
We were going to give it everything we had, one last push.
A huge covert action program to help drive the Soviets out.
December 24th, 1979. When Soviet troops invade Afghanistan, the Cold War suddenly becomes hot. Caught by surprise, U.S. officials worry the Soviets will continue their march into the territory of American allies. The Central Intelligence Agency is immediately directed to begin a covert action program to beat back the communists.
Jimmy Carter issued a secret presidential finding shortly after the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan, and he directed CIA to go ahead and use all means to help the Afghans resist this.
We're basically facing a country with nuclear weapon that could destroy the United States 1,000 times over, and that country was very unstable.
Milt Bearden, a career undercover operative, is head of the CIA cell in Pakistan. Here, Bearden and his team will launch a campaign to drive the Soviets out of Afghanistan and end the Cold War once and for all. A legendary figure among his colleagues, Bearden is ideally suited for the job.
He's a charismatic, larger-than-life figure who loved to operate, loved to be out in the field, liked to really push the envelope of what he was doing.
Milt at the time was greater than life. Nobody comes close.
Bearden's team will work secretly out of the American embassy in Islamabad, Pakistan. The CIA station is a hand-picked group of some of the best officers in American intelligence.
I kept it small. You don't want something big. The Pentagon always wanted to run this thing, and they were thinking in terms of about a battalion of Americans. That's like 500 people. I tried to do it with a handful.
Another CIA intelligence cell will join Bearden's team. Their leader is Gary Schroen, a CIA officer with years of experience in the Middle East.
He is a truly remarkable American, and I think someone who has on many more than one occasion risked his life to further American interests.
CIA officers are a special breed, able to disappear quickly, assume a disguise, and gain the trust of those they recruit to spy for them.
You look for people who can get around the diplomatic circuit, can mix it up with foreign diplomats on a social basis, establish contacts, develop friendships, and those kinds of things that allow them to have access to people that they really want to eventually recruit.
You can't really trust anybody. And even your close friends who are outside the agency, you can't really tell them what you do.
Working cover jobs by day, the CIA officers wait to do their real work under the cover of darkness.
Usually, a case officer would meet his agent at night, after hours, because it would be less prying eyes.
Summer 1985. Bearden and his team methodically gather intelligence about the Soviets' weaknesses inside Afghanistan, where several tribal groups of Afghans known as the Mujahideen resist the invasion. Rugged but disorganized, the Mujahideen are fighting for their homeland.
A couple 100,000 full and part-time fighters. They had their own rhythm of war, and we had to learn to adapt to that. As a fighter, he does it his way, not ours.
And Mujahideen, they were ready to fight in all sides, in all ways. Every single Afghan wanted to fight the Soviets and kill the Soviets, the invaders.
With the Mujahideen, America sees an opportunity to push back the Russians and perhaps cripple the Soviet Union once and for all.
We have an opportunity here to really punish the Soviets. They have made a rare mistake, and a mistake of large proportions. And we ought to rush in to Afghanistan and make sure that they pay as high a price as possible for this error.
The CIA officers must be careful to operate under deep secrecy and not alert the Russian intelligence service, the KGB, of their intentions to support the Afghan resistance.
The Russian KGB was very aggressive at watching our officers and all the American embassy officers, arresting any Afghans who happened to be seen with dealing with Americans.
January 1980. As Russian troops expand their movement into Afghanistan, the CIA sends the first shipments of weapons and supplies to the Mujahideen. The assistance does little to repel the Soviets. The Russians are attempting to occupy a country that has never suffered under foreign rule for long. The Russian soldiers soon learn this.
It was a brutal war in just about every respect. In their memoirs and in the stories they've told as veterans, there's a sense familiar from the experiences of other armies of occupation of just pervasive fear, suspicion, and an attitude of we had better shoot first because the alternative is that they'll get us. And so this contributed to a culture of brutality among the Soviet forces that was exacerbated by a breakdown in discipline on the front lines.
As the vicious war slogs on, the Mujahideen are getting low on weapons. The CIA has more advanced weaponry available, but is wary of tipping their hand to Moscow. If the Soviets learn of America's secret involvement in Afghanistan, it could escalate into nuclear war.
The CIA faced a turning point, and the question was, are we now prepared to supply weapons that it will be obvious came from us?
Kabul, 1986. The Soviet Union rules Afghanistan through fear and brutality. The Afghan resistance fighters known as the Mujahideen are losing the war. Struggling to turn the tide, the CIA must decide which is riskier, provoking the nuclear-armed Soviets or conceding defeat.
President Reagan had decided that this was turning into some sort of a stalemate where the Afghans couldn't win. They would just continue to bleed the Soviets, but in the process of bleeding the Soviets, they had already given up 1 million dead Afghans, 1.5 million wounded, and 5 million had been driven into exile.
There was a decision, collective decision made in Washington at the policy level that we wanted to really ratchet up the effort. So we enlarged the staff both in Washington and in the field.
Spring 1986. CIA officer Milt Bearden meets with agency director William Casey and learns of a new covert task force that will expand America's support for the Mujahideen.
The head of the Afghan task force was a man named Jack Devine, who was very cautious. And Jack was probably the perfect guy to run the task force from Washington because he understood the political dynamics.
There was an effort to make known to them that we were really pushing hard and that they were going to have difficulty.
So Bill Casey's instructions to me were, let's try to go win it, actually win it. I think he had a plan in his own head that involved a variety of hot buttons that he would be using to keep forcing the Soviet Union into a deeper, deeper pit. Try to come up with ways that you can make every day a terrible day for the Soviets, to torment them to where, as their leaders began to discuss with our leaders the prospect of ending this war and reaching an agreement.
To better fight such a ruthless enemy, the CIA first teaches the Mujahideen how to sabotage the Soviets.
Well, one of the other aspects of this whole overall program was to try to cripple the Russian equipment.
Remote-controlled bombs, time devices and occasionally even car bombs and briefcase bombs to try to assassinate the Soviet leadership inside the capital of Kabul.
So there were a lot of these kind of sabotage, quick hit and run raids